a great privilege to have G2 from McCann with us. Welcome to the show, G2.
Thank you, Jesper. Thank you for inviting me.
I did a bit of background on you yesterday, and I stumbled upon you. You write really interesting pieces, right? Deep, interesting pieces. So I want to get into this. I stumbled on a piece where you'd suddenly fallen in love with Iceland because someone you knew had been there and were posting pictures, and you coined this term, citizen marketeer. Is that right?
Yes. So, and this is again in the context of, I was just scrolling through and suddenly, like social media, you end up seeing. And I found that I was discussing with my wife, should we go to Iceland? And the question was, did Iceland ever approach me or market itself to me? Never. I never come across a brochure, or a campaign from Iceland. Who did the job for me? That friend of mine who went there with the family and posted pictures and wrote glowing things about what they experienced there looking at the Northern Lights. And then that set me thinking of the amount of marketing that consumers themselves are doing for brands when unpaid, in the process of trying to project the lives that they live or whatever the emotional benefit that they get of being social media. So if you were to try and put together the amount of marketing that citizens do, so and actually borrow it from citizen journalism. So from citizen journalists, we've come to the age of citizen marketers.
Well, it's very intriguing, and we haven't really touched on this, but I'm sure we could have done, because is it the case, Gigi, do you think that the essence of social media is not the content, it's the people, and the trust is the people that you trust, right? And all the corporates and brand are kind of getting a free ride on this. Do you buy that?
Yes, you're right. The fact is that social media per se is, it's an ether that pervades all around us. And if you go back to that, what's changed this technology? What's changes, media from a particular kind to a particular kind that we consume around? What hasn't changed broadly is what you go back to Maslow's need hierarchy. The need hierarchy remains the same, from a physiological needs to safety needs to then belonging and love to self-esteem to self-actualization. What delivers to those needs has changed. So now when I want to belong or when I want to feel a little better as a self-esteem, the devices that I used 20 years back versus what social media does is it replaces all that. Hence, I am connecting to my social circle or network of friends or families or the people, strangers in a certain sense. And I am creating that equity for myself. And often, brands are leveraging that.
Well, it's an interesting thought, isn't it? Because, we had Rakesh from a previous show on talking about Live Pure and water, right? He's like entry-level Maslow. Yeah. And what's clever about these guys is they've come in right at the top of the pyramid in the social side of it. But so they've kind of gate crashed something that is a really deep need of the people at the highest end. But G2, when you, and often on behalf of your clients, kind of survey social media, just give us, it's hard to do this in a word, just give us in a word how you see it evolving, what you like, what you don't like, simple things like that.
So, if you look at that, and from a marketer's perspective, Nikhil talked about there is relationships that are human relationships, and brand is a living and thriving entity by itself. So there are relationships that I want to form with people, and it's changed the way I'm forming those relationships. But does a relationship require trust or credibility? Yes, of course it does. The medium has changed. In a crowd of 1,000 people, I would require the attention of you. How I get that attention has changed, but the need to get attention remains the same. What's changed is, and when social media came about and they said power to the people, now the power is in the hand of the consumers, and it is true, now it is in the hand of consumers. It also has a bit of a pitfall of saying the ability of certain people to command more attention than others. So therefore, we are in the attention economy. Now the point is, if attention is the currency that everybody is after, it's not necessary that you get attention for the right reasons always.
Yeah, there's a misalignment, isn't there? Because you see these fellows, we talked about this before, you see these fellows have massive followings trying to tell you about stuff they know nothing about, and their only credentials is they've got a big following.
Yeah, so the thing is, it's, the stepping stones have changed. I have the largest number of followers first, and then I start to build. So therefore, I might have built credibility cracking jokes. I'm a stand-up comedian. I might have gotten credibility doing something else. But now that I have X million followers, who are young people or old people or the cohorts that any brands want to go after, now I'm using that credibility to then peddle you something else, which I have no credibility. But the credibility is, but your power comes from having attention of more number of people than someone else.
Well, and I suppose the nice thing about social media is that even if your financial services guy is teaching you how to do fitness, which is a bit unlikely, it will self-regulate, because after time the consumers will figure out he has no real credibility, he has lots of numbers.
Yes, so then eventually it'll even out. So the fact is, but it gives a advantage to somebody who might be a fitness trainer but has about 300 followers and nobody knows him, versus somebody who's not a fitness but actually is a very well-known in somebody else's, some other field. But the fact that you have 10 million followers, his fitness advice will reach more number of people than somebody who's got 300. Eventually it'll even out, but then eventuality is, is a function of time and, resources as well.
It's a bit like what Lalitendra was saying, which is we're sort of in the stage of mass expansion, and now there'll be a sort of synthesis where things are plugged in. We'll see it develop, because I guess it's a medium that develops like anything else, and we're only, what are we, 20 years into this? It's probably in its infancy. Yeah,
so it's currently in this stage of what we're still hit and trial. Nobody knows. I mean, most of us know very less about where it'll go. I mean, the things that were hot trends about 24 or 12 months back are not there anymore. So it's it's evolving, and it's a rapidly evolving medium. So we don't know where it'll head. So I guess, yes, it'll eventually even out. But I go back to the fundamental principles of how human beings live. I mean, we are a physical being. Now, I would replace that physical being digital experiences, but at the end of it, and what we were having a conversation, at one level, I'm spending more time in a digital environment, but then I'm traveling out massively, and I mean, Nikhil will tell you the number of people traveling out to holidays to have physical experiences at the same time growing. So it's not, the world is headed in only one way.
And Lalitendra, free marketeer champion. I mean, do you get a sense that in some ways there's a bit of a backlash, and that people are kind of going full circle back to themselves, and you and me sitting here?
Yeah, so I mean that's the truth of the world. It is cyclical. I mean I'm not being a philosopher here, but the point is it all comes back to the same thing. It's the yin and yang. Sometimes you swing in one way, and sometimes you swing the other way. So there is this thing of, and what you talked about. Will this social media survive? I mean, there is a principle of kitchen sink. In social media or in technology, when the kitchen sink is full, you don't clean it up, you move to another one. So, when there were too many followers and everybody was no code, everybody junked it and moved to something else. You see some bit of that trend happening to probably Facebook. People are saying, oh, I mean, too many of them, and then you keep evolving, moving forward. But I guess that's the, but then you would come back in some form or the other is the reality of the world. I mean,
okay, and I like you being a philosopher. Comment on a fellow philosopher, Edward de Bono, when he says it basically stops you thinking. What's your take on that?
Well, there is a sense of, well, human brain has infinite power, and apparently somebody says in our living life we use less than 5 or 10% of that brain, whatever, infinite capacity in a certain sense. But yes, there is a fact that overload of information would create some blocks to your processing abilities, because I am dealing with too much of an information. The brain would require that, and therefore there is a part truth in that of what he's saying, in saying, look, there is, and the whole behavior is controlled by think, feel, do. You give me information, I think, then I give me a time to, it leads to certain feelings, and that leads to certain actions. But if I'm going to have too much of an information, it would have an impact of, and you're seeing the impact all around. I mean,
okay, we're basically in the last couple of overs here, G2. Cast your mind forward a bit here. I mean, the metaverse, we've touched on that. How do you see that evolving? Are you a buyer that's a whole separate world, or is it still linked to this world?
I come from the Star Trek generation.
Me too.
So beam up Scotty. is the world, and that's the closest we thought probably the metaverse is going to go. I mean, the verdict is out in the open. Probably it will evolve. I mean, there was second life, I mean, when metaverse came, somebody says it didn't work, then what will work and all that. I don't have enough work yet. I'm not an expert. I would not claim to be an expert on that. There is this hugely human trait of wanting to transport ourselves in imaginary world. That's what writers and poets have done for centuries. And when metaverse comes close to doing that, to being able to, transport you somewhere else, so it does sit on some bit of a, very core human need. Have we reached there? Will it reach there? Is something that's open. But yes, there is a possibility, because we always wanted to, as human beings, always wanted to do that.
Well, we will, GT, we will book you in for Trailblazers 2032 or whenever we think this comes to fruition. And separately, Nikhil, I'll explain what Star Trek is, because the rest of us might know, but I think we're showing our age. GT, thank you so much for coming on Trailblazers. Sorry, last question. Number of LinkedIn followers.
So I don't compete with any of them. I'm much lower. I'm probably closer to where you would be.
We're sort of the tier 3 cities.
But there is an interesting thing I just want to add to that. There is often a temptation to saying, look, if I put this, being a practitioner of how to get people to follow brands or create attention, there is a temptation often, but then there it comes to the saying, okay, and as you ask somebody about the personal brand, so what's your social media brand at a certain level? You want to be consistent with that, and therefore, if you write something, so you have to think through a few number of times, because there is a mix of audience that would be there on a platform, and tomorrow you don't want that kind of thing. So that sort of is another thing.
There's no shortcuts, G2, and actually, when I think about it, the coolest dudes I know are not on social media. Who knows? Thank you so much for being on the show. We're delighted to have you.
Thank you, Jasper. Really enjoyed the conversation.